In the name of Allah, the most beneficent and the most merciful. In the first class of MA English weekend, we discussed about the introduction of literature and poetry, how poetry evolved over the period of time, and John Milton's on his blindness was also discussed in detail. Now, in this lecture, we are further going ahead towards our further contents of the syllabus. First one is to cover about the genre of song. So, what originally is song and how is it related to literature and oral literature tradition? A song plays a very general role in oral culture. Well, over the period of time, the oral culture has developed in different regions of the world. The Greeks were the first to start the oral culture in their areas, in which long epic poems were read out in the sittings of elders. So, this was the earliest form of literature. A song, although over the period of time it took different shapes, and a song now particularly is often resemble lyric poetry. It have to be have of tight metrical structure because of the musical accompaniment, because it has musical instruments and music involving around the description of the song. So it must have to be in a tight metrical structure. It shouldn't be in loose form. So it is the first requirement of writing a song, that it should have a metrical structure that is bound, that is tied, not free. Equally, when epic and other recitations are accompanied by a musical instrument or a strong beat. Similarly, when other oral uh, poems or oral traditions are carried out, like epic and other recitations, there is also strong beat. The rhythmical verbal structure is always influenced. Verbal structure doesn't remain uninfluenced, it is influenced because of this strong beat. An important variety of song is the lament. Now, song has different varieties. It could be like a lament or a sad at the death of somebody, so it could be a lament at the death of an individual, which may take the form of stressed speech or follow more melodic lines words. If it's a lament, it must have to be in the stressed speech. It should follow a more melodic lines words, often resemble lyric poetry, having to be of a tight metrical structure because of the musical accompaniment. Equally, when epic and other recitations are accompanied by a musical instrument or a strong beat, the rhythmical verbal structure is always influenced. An important variety of song is the lament. So we discussed about the lament. What is a lament? It's a sad song at the death of some person, which we sing. So similarly, it could be according to the rituals which is mentioned ahead. Songs may be included in rituals and in folk tales. Folk tales mean the local tales of any area. They are also very important, and they have a specific outlook of that particular culture. So the rituals there that are taking place must be mentioned in the folk tales, and they are often performed solely for entertainment. Okay, sometimes they are ritual, but some other times ritual means ceremonial at certain ceremonies, but it could also be for the purpose of entertainment. There shouldn't be any ceremony or any lament or any death or marriage or any other ceremony, but its purpose could also be only for entertainment. The melodies themselves may be elaborated and expanded upon by way of musical instruments. Okay, if the melodies of these songs could be made to be expanded or described more detailed according to its melody, if its melody is designed in such a way, is designed to expand the song, then it must be sung in that particular way. leading to innumerable variations invented for the occasion, as with jazz, such as jazz music that has a song in it, but it has certain lengthy type of narration in it. The ballad is a form of narrative song that arose in Europe during the Middle Ages. Similarly, this song could also be the form in the form of ballad, like mentioned earlier. Epic was also used in oral culture, but it is not only limited to the epic, but ballad could also be a form which developed during the Middle Ages. And it is the arguably part of the mixed oral literary tradition. During 14th and 15th century, it saw its rise. Narrative songs of this kind are much less common in oral cultures. Although varieties of the form mark early literate societies, however, this started a long time before, but it wasn't common in many societies. Songs are distinguished from chant by being shorter and more melodic. Similarly, another type of oral recitation is about chant, but songs are shorter than a chant. Chant is a rhythmic manner of presenting speech that verges on recitation. Further, the definition, a small introduction about the chant is also given, is a rhythmic manner of presenting speech. So it's a way of presenting a particular speech and it depends upon recitation. So this is the introduction about the song, how it developed. It could also be in the form of praise songs and work songs. Work songs are also then it has division on generic basis also. Further, going along with the introduction of song, we must see about the today's song, which is written by Christina Rossetti, uh, which was a pre-Raphaelite poetess. This poetess wrote her songs in an elaborate manner. Small introduction about this poetess is given, that Christina Rossetti was born in 1830. Her father, the Italian poet and political exile Gabriele Rossetti, immigrated to England in 1824 and established a career as a Dante scholar and teacher of Italian in London. So, before her birth in 1830, her father in 1824 established herself as a scholar, Dante scholar, Italian poet. Dante was explained and elaborated by her father. Christina became one of the Victorian age finest poets. She was author of numerous books. Various books were written by this poetess, which include Goblin Market and other poems, The Prince's Progress, A Pageant, and The Face of the Deep. After Browning's death in 1861, readers and critics saw Rossetti as the older poet's rightful successor. She became the rightful successor and thought as one carrying along the tradition of Robert Browning in that era. Further, going along with this introduction about the poetess, readers have generally considered Rossetti's poetry less intellectual, less political, and less varied than Browning's. If it is compared in comparison of the poetry of Browning, if we see the poetry of Rossetti, we come to the conclusion that it is not as intellectual or political, but conversely, they have acknowledged Rossetti as having the greater lyric gift, with her poetry displaying a perfection of diction, tone, and form under the guise of utter simplicity. Now, the merits of her poetry are described, that she has greater lyric gift, and her poetry also showed perfection between diction, wording, tone, style of her poetry, and form, the form which she developed to describe the poetry. And it was not also very unnecessarily complex, but it was rather simple type of poetry. Rossetti speculated in a 26 March 1884 letter to Edmond Gosse. In her own letter, She speculated about her coming or her future career in these words: if anyone thinks could me in the direction of poetry, if something took her towards the poetry, it was perhaps the delightful idle liberty to prowl all alone about my grandfather's cottage grounds. That she got a ruler set up to prowl around and wander about, and saw there the beautiful natural scenes, and there she inhibited in herself, she got or gained in herself the love for poetry. Cottage ground some 30 miles from London. It was away from London, 30 miles away, where she lived and saw these beautiful scenic pictures which encouraged her to become a poetess. Now, as we were discussing that she was a part of pre-Raphaelite movement or pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, sometimes called it is pre-Raphaelite brotherhood. What was pre-Raphaelite movement? It was basically a movement to revive the true artistic forms in England, as the pre-Raphaelite movement poets or its heads considered thought that art was declining rapidly in England. In 1848, William Holman Hart, John Everett Malleus, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti found the pre-Raphaelite brotherhood or movement. So these were the pioneers of this movement. Uh, the Christina's brother was also in it, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. In order to unite English painters, poets, and critics who wanted to reform English art. The purpose was to unite all those painters, poets, and critics pertaining to different forms of art, fine arts, or arts. The pre-Raphaelite brotherhood was not dogmatic. Dogmatic means it was not very strictly based or ruled. It was rather a loose type of group which had certain relaxations in it. It wasn't very strict, hard, and fast, but they did define their doctrines. Instead of its looseness or freedom, it did have some definition, some rules. They declared that pre-Raphaelite artists must, first of all, the poets must have genuine ideas to express. Every poet should have his or her own ideas. Study nature attentively. They must be a good observer of nature, attentive student of nature, so as to know how to express it. Uh, if they are good students, then they will be able to express it, what they have learned from nature. If they haven't studied, observed, analyzed nature, how would they be able to express it? Sympathize with what is direct and serious and heartfelt in previous art. Also, give due value to the previous art or literature which was uh, earlier established or uh, commenced, or it was performed by great artists, to the exclusion of what is conventional and self-parodying and learned by rote. So it must have conventionality in it. Most indispensable of all, the most important characteristic now being described is for the poets is to produce thoroughly good pictures and statues. The artists, the painters, were to paint these pictures, and similarly, in that manner, the poets also describe different scenes as if they were painting them. So that is use of color and the certain similes or metaphors regarding paint or painting were used by the poets, because they were following the tradition set by the pre-Raphaelite movement or pre-Raphaelite brotherhood. So going further, next about the song, about this particular song uh, that that is about the uh, that is written by Christina Rossetti, "When I Am Dead, My Dearest." This song is described briefly here. That song was written in 1848 when Christina Rossetti was still a teenager. She wasn't very mature at that time, and her poetry wasn't mature also, but she wrote it in a teenage, but not published. It wasn't published for 14 years until 1862, when it appeared in her first volume of poetry, Goblin Market and Other Poems. The poem is a variation on the theme of John Donne's A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. So it is also a variation. It seems a variation on the John Donne's earlier poem, and provides a neat complement to another Christina Rosti's early poem, the sonnet Remember, which she wrote a year after When I Am Dead, My Dearest. The poem was written afterward, and it also has some essential features of that coming poem. So the text would also be explained. Now the summary of the poem, if we want to understand this summary, in the first stanza, when we read the poem, when I am dead, my dearest, sing no sad songs for me, plant though no roses at my head, no shady cypress tree, be the green grass above me, with showers and dewdrops wet, and if thou wilt remember, and if thou wilt forget, I shall not see the shadows, I shall not feel the rain, I shall not hear the nightingale sing on as if in pain, and dreaming through the twilight that doth not rise nor set, happy I may remember, and happily I may forget. Happily I may remember, and happily may forget. So, if we see the summary of this poem, the incidents being described in the two stanzas of 8 lines each, what we come to know that in the first stanza, the speaker asks her beloved that when she dies, he doesn't sing any sad songs for her or put flowers or plant a tree on her grave. The grass on her grave showered by rain and morning dew will be enough. So she doesn't want any loved one or to come to her or do all these services for her. And if he does remember her, that's fine. But if he forgets her, so be it. But she is not dependent, because why she not dependent? Because it is explained in the second stanza. The speaker explains why she isn't fussed about. She isn't disturbed what her beloved does to remember her after she has died. She will not be there to see the shadows or feel the rain or hear the nightingale singing after death. All these elements, uh, if they are carried out or not, poetess is not there to judge it or analyze it, observe it. She would be dead. She will be dreaming and sleeping. So her state will not be dependent on the outward manifestations of the people doing different odds and jobs for her, dreaming and sleeping through a perpetual twilight, and she may remember him, but she may not. If we see the analysis of this poem, Christina Rossetti implies through stating that she may not remember her beloved after she has died, that there may be no afterlife, and that she may not be capable of remembering him. Happily, the word Rossetti uses twice at the end of the poem is not quite the same as happily. She doesn't say it happily, she says happily. It means by chance, or if you will, perhaps. It means that if it is their will to remember her, then they are welcome, they could remember her. But if they don't, it doesn't matter. Rossetti seems to be unsure. Here in these lines, the poet is not very sure about herself. She rejects the glib message of Christianity, which reassures us that there will be an afterlife to go to. She also becomes uncertain about the life hereafter, and that when we die, we will be able to look down on those we love and watch over them. But Rosti seems less sure of this. She is not very sure that if it is going to happen or not, whether she will be able to watch the people, or look down upon them. Indeed, the poem's very message asking that her beloved will not seek to remember her in all of the usual conventional ways a lover was expected to. So she wasn't expecting in a conventional way for her lover to do all these things for her, placing flowers on the grave, singing sad songs, and other things also. So we will do this analysis in detail, inshallah, during our class. Thank you, students. Take care.